Okay, Chapter 5, Rome and the Rise of Christianity. We study this chapter for several weeks, and there's a reason for that. And some of the reasons are because of a lot of the contributions that the Romans have given to us. One, for example, is a saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And of course, in Roman times, it meant when you were in the city of Rome or in the Roman Empire, you needed to act and follow the laws and do as the Romans did. Today, it means pretty much if you are at some location, you need to act as those people do in that location. Another contribution is Roman numerals that will use in this outline, and that is very important to know as well, whether they are used for noting what Super Bowl we're in or in the outline notes as you have in front of you. But the real reason that we study Rome for this amount of time is because Rome became the largest and most powerful empire in the world up to this point in time. And because of that, its contributions, its influence was obviously crossing 3 continents, and so it was very important. So starting on page 3, we are going to take our notes for section 1. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the geography. Italy, of course, where you know, since we just studied Europe, is in the same location in ancient Roman times, but you can use the map on page 150 to understand what Italy looked like in this time period. The Italian peninsula is what makes up most of Italy, and it runs 750 miles from north to south, and it is about 120 miles east to west. Of course, it is the identifiable boot-shaped peninsula on the European continent. Running the length of the Italian peninsula are the Apennine Mountains, and those mountains were used as protecting Rome. Rome had a lot of fertile plains and was able to sustain enough agriculture for all of the people that ended up being part of the Roman Empire. On the map on page 150, you can see that Italy, or the Italian peninsula, is kind of divided into 3 regions. You have Latium, which is where Rome is located and the surrounding areas. You have the Po River Valley, which is Etruria, it's north of Rome, and Campania, which is part of southern Italy or south of Rome. All right, why did the geography help Rome to become this large and powerful empire? Well, unlike Greece, they both have mountains, but unlike Greece, the mountains were something that divided the city-states and isolated them. In Rome, the Apennine Mountains were less rugged, and so they protected the city of Rome itself, but yet it didn't isolate the Italian peninsula. Also, unlike Greece, dealing with the farmland. Greece had very little farmland, and so, of course, it had to do a lot of importing of the food. Rome had lots of farmland and could support the large population. I think at its height, it was about 50 million people, and so, of course, you needed lots of farmland to support that large population. The city of Rome itself was located, or is still located, 18 miles inland off of the Mediterranean Sea, which made it really a safe place from any attacks from pirates. It was also located on the Tiber River, which gave it a route to the Mediterranean Sea for trading and also for protection. It was also easily defended because it was on 7 hills, and the 7 hills obviously gave Rome that location that was easily to defend. And it was also in the center of the Italian peninsula and the center of the Mediterranean world, which of course was strategic once Rome controlled most of the Mediterranean. All right, your maps on the very last page of your packets. I believe it is on page 48. We are going to label the maps. So we have talked about the city of Rome. We have talked about the Tiber River. We have talked about the Mediterranean Sea. And then we will continue to add to those as we go through. On the other side of your map, you have a chart comparing ancient Greece to ancient Rome. And so this is something I really want you to think about and fill out so we can compare these two ancient civilizations. As far as geography goes, you're going to need to know two of these, and there are more than two, but as we mentioned, the mountains divided ancient Greece, whereas the mountains protected ancient Rome. Greece had very little farmland, and Rome had lots of farmland. Greece was on the European continent, and so was Rome. Greece was also on the Mediterranean, and so was ancient Rome. And Greece had no major rivers that we mentioned, and of course Rome's major river was the Tiber River. All right, the people of Italy, again, on page 150 on that very same map, it mentions the Latins. And the Latins were farmers and herders that were from north of Rome, and they existed from 1500 to 1000 BC. And of course, this is where we get the Latin language, or they contributed the Latin language that the Romans used as their own language. Today, we use Latin for scientific names. It's also on your U.S. currencies. For example, the E pluribus unum means out of many comes one. And it's also used in Catholicism. Eventually, the Latins moved into Italy, and they contributed to Rome and its culture. All right, on our chart, we are going to compare the alphabet or language to Greece and Rome. In Greece, if you remember, of course, they spoke and wrote ancient Greek. And in Rome, they spoke Latin from the Latins. Both of these languages were Phoenician-based, but they also contribute a lot of words to the English language. All right, after 800 BC, the Greek and Etruscan influences were tremendous on Rome. So what did they borrow from the Greeks? Well, the Greeks existed from 750 to 550 BC in southern Italy and in Sicily. And so, of course, they were very close, and so had a lot of significant influences. They showed Romans how to cultivate things such as grapes and olives. The Greek alphabet, of course, contributed a lot to Latin, and of course a lot of Greek words because the Romans studied Greek in portions of the Roman Empire as well. And of course art and culture. For example, architecture. You will see a lot of the architecture that was borrowed from the Greeks that the Romans used. Another group of people that influenced the Romans were the Etruscans. And these are the people that existed after 650 BC, and they lived north of Rome, and they kind of came in and took over Rome, and they controlled Rome for about 100 years. And so they turned Rome from a small little village into a major city. And so they lived in Etruria, and the things that were borrowed from the Etruscan were their style of dress, the toga and the short cloak, and a lot of army organization. Also, the Etruscans taught the Romans how to build roads, which they were known for, did a lot with pottery, and also a sanitation system. All right, the Roman Republic. A republic is a government that does not have a king or a queen, and the citizens have a right to vote. The Roman Republic was established in 509 BC, and it's unlike a democracy because here only the wealthy could be elected to offices. All citizens had the right to vote, but they only could vote for wealthy people. Now, a republic, of course, is a vocabulary word, but it's also a contribution. And so the word republic is used in our Pledge of Allegiance, for example, or we identify governments as republics today. Rome was known for war and conquering many lands. Obviously, if they controlled the largest empire in the world at this point, they had to do this. And Rome was kind of surrounded by what they would call their enemies for the next 200 years. They fought those enemies in almost continuous warfare. So in 338, they defeated the Latins. The next 50 years, they basically started controlling most of all of the Italian peninsula. In 264, they defeated the Greeks and controlled all of Italy, since the Greeks controlled southern Italy and Sicily. At this point, they established the Roman Confederation, and this allowed some of those conquering peoples, conquered peoples, especially the Latins, to become Roman citizens. If they were not allowed to become citizens, they were called allies, and these allies really truly felt like they were part of this republic and like they could become citizens at any time. They were typically free to run themselves, but their main purpose was to provide soldiers to the Roman army. All right, on our map, we already have labeled Rome, the Tiber River, the Mediterranean Sea, and now we're going to label Italy because Rome has now expanded from a city to the entire Italian peninsula. So why was Rome so successful? One of their reasons was because of their values as a sense of duty, courage, and discipline. A good example of that is about Cincinnatus. And Cincinnatus was basically, he was a farmer of Rome. And when Rome was under attack, he was named as a temporary dictator or ruler. And he did a great job to help Rome in their time of need. And really, he told him that he would be a leader for 6 months, a dictator for 6 months, but after about 15 days, he decided he just wanted to go back to his farm. So he stepped in when he was needed and then stepped down when he wasn't. And so that just shows a good example of their sense of duty, courage, and discipline. Another reason that the Romans were so successful is because of the fact that they were very good diplomats. They granted citizenship to people that they conquered. They allowed areas and regions to run and rule themselves. However, if you crossed Rome or angered Rome, they were very firm with what they needed to do, and they would crush any sort of rebellions, and they would do it without mercy, and they would be very cruel about it to make a point that we are very flexible until you anger us. Another reason that Rome was so successful is because they excelled in military matters. They were accomplished and persistent soldiers. They never gave up. They would typically fight to the death. The generals were brilliant strategists, and because they were good at strategizing in war, they conquered many lands. They fortified towns, and this gave it protection. Specifically, they built walls. Almost all of their cities were constructed in the same manner, and each of them had a wall around it to protect it. They also built roads that we mentioned that the Etruscans kind of showed them how to do, and anytime they conquered new lands, they would build new roads to make sure that they could get there, and the troops could get there quickly and leave quickly in case of some enemy attacks. Romans were also practical. In other words, they addressed problems only when they came up, and they created some sort of a solution as they came up. Why worry about something unless it happened? The other reason why Romans were very practical is because they tended to borrow ideas. Instead of reinventing the wheel, they would use and borrow ideas and things from other people that they conquered. And that was a very brilliant idea. All right, on our chart, we're going to talk about the military. Both Greece and ancient Rome had a very strong army. They were known for their army. Greece had to create a navy in a time of need, and so did Rome, that we'll mention a little bit later, but they're both very noted for having a strong army. All right, the Roman state. Once they finally took over Rome and kicked out the Etruscans, Romans tried to establish a government that did not look anything like the Etruscan government of a monarchy. And so they made sure that they no longer had this kingship because they did not believe that it was very useful.